it started in elementary school, when I like first became aware of what ethnicity was, like, you know, 4th, 5th grade, where you start to really understand what is ethnicity, what is race, what is culture, and how does that relate to me. And I remember going to school and learning about it, that I'd go home and I asked my mom and I asked my grandma and I asked, you know, my grandpa, and I'm like, what are we? And then they gave me the whole spiel: the Spanish, Japanese, Italian, Mexican, Colombian, Irish, and English. And I remember being so excited. And I went to school and I was like, hey, everyone, I figured out what I am. And then I went down the list and I was met with, you can't be more than 2 things. I think it came from, one, being in a private school. So there was only so many of us and we'd all grown up together up to that point. From kindergarten through 5th grade, it's the same kids. And 2, I think it also came from standardized tests. Because if you've ever looked at a standardized test and they ask for your ethnicity, they say, check a box, but check no more than 2.
Right.
So you have somebody like me sitting there like, what do I check?
I was like, for the first time in my life, in a class that was noticeably not predominantly Asian. And it kind of, for the first time, I like saw myself and I saw all these other non-Asian people. And I was like, I am Asian. Or like, I was wondering, like, I wonder if they see me as Asian.
And when your ethnicity or your identity is questioned, how often do people ask you, what are you?
All the time.
Okay.
I mean, like, the default is Hispanic because Southern California. But the majority of the time people are like, are you? Like, they're not quite sure. So then I have to go through the whole spiel of being a mutt.
Asked to provide evidence, like,
yeah. Yeah, he was like, prove it. I was like, I don't know how you expect me to prove it. Like, you don't even know who my dad is. And it's just like, there's nothing I can do to prove it to you. Like, there's no like race card that I could just flash to you that proves something. Like, you can't track race. Race isn't something that is a bloodline or something. Like, you can't do that. So it just really confused me, especially as a kid, because like, you're just a kid, you don't really understand or like comprehend things like that as well. But I just knew it just made me really mad.
So yeah, I don't often get asked like, what are you? Or like, you know, because I think people are, because I am a bit ambiguous, people generally are a bit not, they're like less inclined to ask. Usually people will, if like they guess, I get like a lot of Filipino. Occasionally I've gotten like Hispanic, but more so like when I was younger. But yeah, when I do finally, or when we get to the point where like, oh yeah, I'm half Vietnamese or half Indian, or like comes up, there is usually some like shock factor, because I think it's just like a strange like combination of races that you don't get to see too often. But yeah, from strangers especially, I don't really have too many issues. I actually feel a lot more aware of like my race or like how I identify when I hang out with people like who are fully like my close friends, or I have a couple of my close friends are like fully Indian or like fully Vietnamese. And like even when I hang out with my family, that is when I usually feel much more, like self-aware of how not Indian and how not Vietnamese that I am.
But anytime it comes into a be divided by race, or something is defined by race in any regard of our society, it's really difficult for me to just go one way or another. it's just really hard to go through life always questioning like what you're doing, if you are enough of something to qualify to be a part of a club.
Think so. Occasionally I'll get like, oh, like if I meet a Vietnamese, it's very specifically to the specific cultures that I'm from. But if I meet someone within those cultures, like if I meet a Vietnamese person or an Indian person, there will be that sort of like especially when I was younger and we were kind of like forming our identities, and like there was that very thing of like basing your identity over like very concrete things, like, oh, I'm like a Harry Potter person or whatever. And so, like when I would meet another Indian kid in school, we would try to like relate to each other. And I remember once in middle school, again, I was talking to like one of the other few Indian kids, and they brought up they're like, oh, I went to Holi over a weekend or something along those lines. And I had no clue what that was. And I mean, my understanding of it now is that it's like this Hindu festival of colors. And I am not Hindu. My father isn't Hindu, he's Muslim. So I feel like it's kind of valid that I didn't know what it was, regardless of how attached I was to my culture. But yeah, I didn't know what it was, but I pretended that I knew what it was because I was very desperate and I really, really wanted to make friends with the other Indian kid. And I was like, oh yeah, of course. I know all about Holi. But yeah, I don't get asked for evidence for my ethnicity, but I sometimes feel like I need to like be like, oh, like say the words, like connect with them, like say the food and prove that you are one. Prove that you are one with the people.
Would you say that people are pretty shocked when you say exactly what it is that comprises you?
Oh, all the time. Like most of it is, oh, and then like I'll get some reactions where people like put the pieces together and they're like, oh, so your eyes definitely Asian, but these are definitely Hispanic. Like, and they'll start putting my face into categories.
Wow. How does that make you feel when they do that?
I mean, it's kind of weird, but like one thing that I've been told growing up, because it's not even just from outside sources, it's from inside my family too, is I've been told you have Asian eyes. So I was like really gravitated to my eyes because that was, you know, the culture that everybody really liked was the Japanese culture. And that's what was really celebrated in my household. So when it came down to, you know, my physical appearance and people would always assign, oh, your eyes are Asian, then I would really start focusing on them as like a center of beauty, I guess. And like they became the standard for the rest of my face. And it's like this really weird, it's like, it's really hard to explain. It's just this weird dichotomy of existence.
I remember like my first year of high school, of college and stuff. These girls, I lived in like a learning community. So I got along with basically almost everyone there. But a couple of girls weren't at the time. And because of that, they blamed it on saying, oh, well, you're just light skinned. That's why they get along with you. Like you're the stereotypical light skin. Like you're nice, you're not problematic, you're not loud. Like you do everything that they want. And I'm just like, it was just mostly a conflict between guys and girls, but well, Black men and Black women. And because I was light skinned, they're saying, oh, you're light skinned. That's why they like you. Because there's just a lot of colorism within the Black community, and like I'm not even gonna deny it, because like even going through and seeing things like in like culture, Black culture and stuff, you see like a lot of Black men like disrespecting Black women because of like their darker skin, and then they put those who are light skinned on a pedestal. But that's not even, I don't even do anything that they want. It's just like it's just a personality conflict, but they brought race and me being light skinned into it.
So yeah, I never felt particularly estranged when I was a kid, but in my school there was a noticeable lack of brown faces, which I don't know if I recognized at the time. It was definitely not like it didn't matter. There was in middle school one other Indian guy, and I guess for like obvious reasons we were shipped together. Shipping being like when it was like a kind of stems from like fandom culture, and if you think like two people would make a good couple, you kind of like merge their names and it's like a whole thing. And anyways, yeah, so me and the one other Indian guy were shipped together, and that was like a huge joke from 7th to 8th grade. But it wasn't like a negative experience. It was more of something, it was like mildly annoying to deal with. Mostly because kids are like, we didn't really have a sense of humor at that point, and I don't know, people kind of took it quite far, but it didn't like hurt me, and I didn't feel ostracized. It just like kind of felt very middle school.
If you're in a situation where people are expecting you to speak the language, and you say that you can't, what's the response that you normally get?
Oh, really? Like, because especially in Southern California, like it's mostly with Spanish. Like knowing a little bit of Japanese is like a fun fact. But in Southern California, I'll be approached, and like the grocery store right down my house is a Hispanic grocery store, and the greeting is "Hola, ¿cómo estás?" And I'm like, "Hi," you know. And I know these very few words that I've picked up, but it's like Spanish is the default there, and I am the alien, you know?
Yeah.
Or like, this is a gross story, but one guy was hitting on me in like a store, and he hit on me in English, and then he hit on me in Spanish because he didn't think I understood. But that was a whole nother uncomfortable interaction. Or being a kid and helping out with yard sales, and people are like, "Oh, bolsa," or bag, however you say it. I don't even know. But it's like people seem to default to Spanish when they look at me, and I have to be like, "I'm sorry, I got nothing."
So you feel the need to apologize.
For sure, because it's like, I guess because I understand where they're coming from, like, because I have been in places like, you know, the grocery store down my street. Obviously, it's not the whole society, but I've been in select situations where I don't speak this language, therefore I feel disconnected. So for somebody to come up to me and feel comfortable enough to speak, you know, their native language, almost like they're reaching out as some safe haven to me. Like, it's okay to talk to you in my mother tongue because you'll understand it. And then to just tell them, sorry, no lifeboat here. We're gonna have to do this awkward little dance of what do you need?
Something related to your cultures that you will not do or say because you don't want to feel judged?
Thinking about it, I don't know. Like, I don't really know too much of my culture with like my Asian side being Indonesian because I just don't know. So I identify heavily with my Black side. I try and like not to be a stereotype. I don't really say the N word because like there's no point in doing something if people can't even like tell that you're Black. Like being a Black person and stuff, like you have to check being a biracial Black person and stuff, you have to check your privilege and stuff, because if I were just to keep to say that, like that could offend somebody and they just didn't know I was Black. Even though I am Black, it's just something that I just don't do.
Well, one thing that, like, as far as my culture goes, one thing that I had stopped doing was I kind of stopped so wholeheartedly embracing, you know, the Japanese side of me, is because I felt like I wasn't Japanese enough, you know? And it's kind of the same thing with Hispanic and even, you know, Italian and everything else. It's like, well, I'm not that enough to integrate into it. So I guess that's why I guess that also goes back into why white is the default, is because there is no white culture, you know, you're just a white person. So it was easier to just be white than it was to be Hispanic, because being Hispanic meant, oh, you had to understand all of these things. And it's like, well, I don't understand, you know, Spanish. I do have some Hispanic family recipes that have been passed down, but nothing, you know, like concrete, nothing that felt enough. Everything felt like a watered down version.
Most people would question what I am.
And did they seem shocked when you would tell them?
Yeah, a lot of the times they would, and oftentimes like they'd be so surprised. Like sometimes like they would argue with me about it. Like, I don't understand why you're arguing with me about my own ethnicity and my own race and how I identify. It's just really irritating.
So when you say argue with you, do you mean like they would deny it for you?
Yes, basically. I remember in middle school, I'm sorry, I should have clarified this. I identify as Black and Indonesian. So in middle school, I was talking to another student and he's Black, but he likes to joke around a lot. But I don't know if he was serious or if he was just a jokester. Either way, it was just really disrespectful. He asked me what my ethnicity was. And I was like, oh, I'm Black and I'm Asian. And he was like, you're not Black. And I was like, yes, I am. He's like, you don't look Black. I'm just like, okay, well, I am. I don't know what you're arguing with me about, whether I'm Black or not. And it just kept escalating. And I was like, the first time, I guess someone outside my family who like said something like that to me, I was like, it just took me really aback, and just like, it was just very disrespectful.
But then the same time, when I would default to Japanese, then there's the outer circle, like outside of my family, who are like, you're not Japanese, like you don't look Japanese, it's like, what are you, a weeb? Which I admit I was, and I was kind of cringe, but like then that became tainted, you know?
Can you explain what a weeb means?
Okay, so a weeb is a weeaboo, is somebody who is super obsessed with anime and kind of just that surface level understanding of Japanese culture that just kind of takes it too far, and they start speaking like broken Japanese in sentences and start like identifying with these characters and start wanting to be referred to themselves as like chan or san, which are common Japanese honorifics, even though they have they're 100% white, you know, or 100% not Japanese in any way, shape, or form.
And you said that you felt like that even though you are Japanese.
Yeah, pretty much, because I'm not Japanese enough.
Why are you choosing specifically to say watered down?
I guess it's because it's the best way to describe it. Like my specific relationship to it is like, I guess the default, how I always thought about it, is you have like pure, or how it's been presented to me, is you have pure ethnicities, like pure Filipino, pure Japanese, pure Hispanic, pure Mexican, you know, whatever. And then the second you add white to it, it becomes a watered down version. So in a way, the more white that was introduced, the less culture there was, the less ethnicity there was. Even though white is its own ethnicity, it's this weird kind of amalgamation, and it's like being American, you know, like what does that actually mean, especially being in the melting pot where we are, how there are so many, you know, first generation, second generation, and I'm like, you know, third generation, or actually, yeah, third generation US citizen. So it's like farther removed from the center, I guess.
I was going through this thread and they're saying like, oh, well, if you're biracial, you're not really Black. Like even if you're Black mixed with something else, you're not really Black. You don't go through the experiences Black people do. Or same thing with like Asian people, like you're not fully something, so they like outcast you and put you to the side. So it's like I don't think that's like the entire community and stuff like that, but I've seen like different people within those community do that, say like, well, you're not Black, you're just your own category. Like, I don't accept you as a Black person.
Yeah, I guess I have had like a little bit of disrespect. Like there are people that are like, oh, you're not Hispanic. And then I'm like, well, I'm not just Hispanic. And then I clarify that and they're like, oh yeah, Japanese, that makes sense. Or people would just hear white and they're like, oh, white, got it. But yeah, I mean, a lot of the disrespect came in like elementary school. I feel like people just got nicer as I got older, but elementary school, there was definitely like, you're not really Hispanic because you can't speak Spanish. You know,
even growing up with like with my friends and stuff, like in elementary school, I have friends who were Chinese and Filipino, and like they would always exclude me just because I wasn't Asian enough, which is just really frustrating too, because I am Asian just because I didn't grow up with my culture or my mom like knowing her roots, because she immigrated from the Netherlands when she was like 5 to Oakland. So, I mean, they always try to exclude me, say, oh, well, you just wouldn't understand. You're not Asian enough, or you're not this type of Asian. And I'm just like, oh, well, okay. You just say you just didn't want to include me. That's it. You don't have to bring that into it.
And I kind of feel safer if I'm not, if I'm racially ambiguous, I'm safe. If I'm not, you know, accentuating any one feature over the other, then I'm safe, you know? And it just adds to the already complex life of a girl in America.
And when you say safe, do you have any specifics?
Safe from scrutiny, safe from questions, because it's so hard to answer these questions. It's always a thing. Like I can't just list off I'm all of like Spanish, Japanese, Italian, Mexican, Colombian, Irish, and English in a normal conversation and it not be a thing. Like people want to talk about that, you know? And it's like, it's just easier if you're not asking me these questions. Because I don't owe that to strangers. I don't owe that to acquaintances. But it feels like I have to explain it. I have to explain my very existence. So it's better to just be weirdly racially ambiguous and then go through life and not address it.
I honestly do not know the purpose these categories held in society. I mean, I understand to some extent, I guess, if you're looking at statistics and stuff like that, but it feels like any other category that society has created feels arbitrary and it feels imposed and it feels unnecessary. And I think that personally, it would be, I don't hate them, but I think that if these categories didn't exist, I think that'd be an interesting thought experiment. I think that'd be a very positive thought experiment. Yeah.